If you open the history books of American automotive culture, the chapter on the muscle car usually ends abruptly in 1972. The ink dries up, the pages turn gray, and the narrative shifts to a depressing tale of fuel shortages, strangling emissions regulations, and insurance premiums that cost more than the cars themselves. The general consensus is that the golden age died the moment the compression ratios dropped. But if you look closer at the fine print, you will realize that the king didn't die in 1972. The Pontiac GTO, the very machine credited with starting the horsepower wars, was still fighting. It was still on the assembly line, and it was still trying to bring thunder to a world that was rapidly trying to silence it.
This is not a story about the glory days of 1964 or the excessive horsepower of 1969. This is the story of the hangover. It is the story of the 1973 Pontiac GTO, a vehicle that history has largely scrubbed from its memory. It is a car that exists in the uncanny valley of muscle car heritage, often mocked by purists and ignored by collectors. But to dismiss this machine is to ignore one of the most fascinating pivots in General Motors history. This is the story of the GOAT that time forgot, and why it might actually be a better driver's car than the legends that came before it. To understand the 1973 GTO, you have to understand the hostile environment it was born into. By 1973, the American automotive landscape was undergoing a seismic shift, and none of it was good for the enthusiast. The federal government had declared war on the sleek chrome bumper designs of the 60s. New mandates required bumpers that could withstand a 5-mile-per-hour impact without damage. This forced designers to slap heavy, protruding steel beams onto the front and rear of cars that were never designed to carry them. Simultaneously, the Environmental Protection Agency was tightening the noose on tailpipe emissions. The days of high-octane leaded fuel were over. Unleaded gas was the new standard, which meant engines could no longer run high compression. They were choking for air, starved for fuel, and shackled by primitive smog pumps.
Amidst this chaos, Pontiac launched the Colonnade era. This was a complete reimagining of the GM A-body platform, which included the Chevelle, the Cutlass, and the Le Mans. The 1973 GTO was based on this new architecture, and visually, it was a radical departure from the Coke bottle curves of the previous generation. The roofline was formal, almost upright. The glass area was massive, often broken up by the controversial opera windows on luxury trims. It was a design language that screamed personal luxury rather than quarter-mile time. When you parked a 1973 model next to a 1972, they looked like they came from different planets. The 73 was heavier, visually denser, and carried an interior that looked more like a law office than a cockpit. Despite the polarizing looks, the public actually bought into the Colonnade concept in droves. These cars were everywhere. However, the GTO specifically was a ghost. Pontiac only built 4,806 GTOs for the 1973 model year. To put that in perspective, they sold nearly 72,000 GTOs in 1969. By 73, the GTO wasn't a standalone model anymore. It was an option package on the Le Mans, a ghost of its former self hiding in the order guide. The rarity of this car cannot be overstated. Seeing one today is statistically harder than spotting a high-end exotic. But let's address the elephant in the room, the performance. There is no point in sugarcoating the numbers because they paint a bleak picture of the era. If you were a speed freak walking into a Pontiac dealership in 1973, you had two engine choices, and neither of them was particularly terrifying. The base engine was the 400 cubic inch L78 V8. In the glorious past, a Pontiac 400 was a weapon. In 1973, thanks to a dismal 8.2-to-1 compression ratio, it was rated at just 230 horsepower. Now, we must remember that the industry switched from SAE gross to SAE net horsepower ratings around this time, which accounted for accessories like the alternator and water pump, making the drop look even sharper on paper. But even with that caveat, 230 horses in a car weighing nearly 2 tons was not exactly earth-shattering. For those who refuse to accept mediocrity, there is the optional 455 cubic inch L75 V8. This was the big boy, the torque monster. However, do not confuse this with the legendary Super Duty 455 that was terrorizing the streets in the Firebird Trans Am. The GTO did not get the Super Duty. It got the standard D-Port 455. Despite displacing 7.5 liters of air, it only churned out 250 horsepower. It was still breathing through a large 4-barrel carburetor, but the camshaft profile and the cylinder heads were designed for low RPM cruising, not high RPM screaming. It was a tractor engine in a tuxedo.
The drivetrain options were equally a mixed bag of compromise and potential. If you stuck with the smaller 400 engine, you could actually spec the car with a 3-speed or a 4-speed manual transmission, coupled with a 3.42 rear gear safety track differential. That setup offered a glimpse of the old-school engagement. However, if you stepped up to the big 455, Pontiac forced you into an automatic transmission. The engineers deemed the torque too much for the driveline warranty, or perhaps they just assumed the 455 buyer was more interested in highway cruising. A 455-equipped GTO typically came with a highway-friendly 3.08 rear gear.
So what did this mean for the stopwatch? In the quarter mile, the 455 GTO would lumber across the line in the high 14-second range. The 400-powered cars were stuck in the mid to high 15s. The sprint from 0 to 60 took anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5 seconds. By modern standards, a minivan will humiliate a 1973 GTO. By the standards of 1969, it was a solid second or two off the pace. It seemed, on the surface, that the GTO was a failure, a bloated, slow, government-compliant shadow of a legend. But that is only half the story. If you stop obsessing over straight-line acceleration and look at the engineering beneath the sheet metal, the 1973 GTO pulls an ace from its sleeve. This car did something no GTO before it could do effectively. It could turn corners. When General Motors completely redesigned the A-body platform for 1973, they poured millions into chassis dynamics, effectively reinventing how an American muscle car could move. They revised the front suspension geometry for superior camber gain, relocated shock absorbers for better damping, and equipped the GTO with thick sway bars and heavy-duty springs. The result was a revelation. While a 1967 GTO often handled like a shopping cart with a rocket strapped to it, the 1973 model drove like a proper Grand Tourer. It was planted, predictable, and possessed actual steering feel. With standard power front disc brakes and finned rear drums, it was finally a machine you could drive on a winding road without fearing for your life.
Here lies the tragic irony. Just as the engines were choked by regulations, the car itself became better than ever. It transitioned from a crude drag strip brawler into a sophisticated cruiser. It was the right car for the wrong time. If this advanced chassis had been paired with the high-compression monsters of 1970, it would have been the greatest muscle car ever built. This paradox creates an incredible opportunity for modern enthusiasts. The market remains irrational, paying 6 figures for rough-riding 1969 models while ignoring the rare 1973. With only 4,800 built and fewer than 500 featuring the big 455 engine, this is a unicorn status car, yet you can find solid examples for $25,000. For the price of a used Honda Civic, you get a rare, big block piece of history that is genuinely comfortable to drive.